Welcome back to DSR. We are covering the Frontliner, and this is part 4 of 4. This is the last one, I promise. But before I go any further, safety warning. This video is full of math. Lots and lots of math. If you don't like that, you may want to tune out. If you're a math nerd and you like how things are calculated, this might be for you, or this is for you. All right. And first up, thanks Christian Claremont 3672 for keeping me honest. First up, here is a table of the builds that I went over in the last couple of videos. You see that there are frontliner builds, tank builds. We're going to focus in on the frontliners just so that this isn't overwhelming. But yeah, this is the same table. Now, there are a few differences. You might see those eagle-eyed viewers out there who are comparing this to the last video or who just have an excellent memory, better than mine. You can see that some of these numbers have changed a little bit. That's because I went back, refined some calculations, double-checked math, found a few things I wanted to correct, and also I added in critical hits into the DPR. So that didn't add very much, and it kept them all relatively the same. Like they all increased by a relatively the same amount. So relative to each other, they're all the same. But I knew down the road, as soon as I got to like a champion fighter build or a hexblade warlock, that was going to bite me in the butt. So I better just do it now. Okay, so I put in the critical hit damage, added that calculation in there. And you see another couple of columns I added, or one more column I added, DRPR. I'm going to go over every column and explain what they are, okay? I'm going to do it this time. Here we go. First up, just for those who maybe didn't see the last video or don't recall, some of these had blanks in them, the Artificer Battlesmith and the Ranger Beastmaster. Their hit point, self-heal, armor class, DTPM, DRPR columns are all blank because I had to calculate the PC, the player character, and their pet separately and then roll them up. And it didn't make sense to roll up their hit points and all those other numbers. It only made sense to roll up their DPR and their total rounds to live, RTL. So that's why it's done that way, but it's just too big to try to show it this way all the time. So that's why you see it collapse like that in some blanks. Finally, nobody's brought this up, but I just wanted to call it out to be thorough. That little square triangle in the corner is the note to myself to remind me that I did, in fact, apply the Reckless. Basically, I'm treating it like an armor class penalty from Reckless, and apply the Rage bonus, reducing the damage you're taking. And I reminded myself that that's where I put it. I put those modifications into the numbers that I calculated there. And that's just so I don't keep track of it. You don't need to know that, but that's how I did it. Okay, first up, DPR stands for damage per round. And what it means is the total damage your character is dealing per round. And it factors in all the damage numbers, okay? We're going to go over those. And in order to calculate the damage you're dealing, you have to know how much AC the monster has and some other numbers. So we are assuming monsters in the CR range of 2 to 4, which is the majority of the monsters you're going to face in meaningful fights. You might face some easier fights, but those are frankly going to be trivial. And so the damage you're taking and damage you're dealing isn't going to matter as much. You're just going to stomp that fight, okay? So we're just talking about non-trivial fights. Also, the player character, every one of these player characters, these builds I've made, have an 18 in their primary attack ability score to give them a +4 modifier to hit. And they have a +2 proficiency bonus because every one of them is level 4. Okay, so it's a total of a +6 to their attack roll. Okay, and I'm going to do a walkthrough of the damage calculation a bit later. Let's finish defining these columns and numbers first. Okay, next up is DTPM, which is not a community standard term. It's just something I came up with to abbreviate so that those labels on the column won't be so long. It's damage taken per monster. All right, so yeah, the idea is if there was one monster, this is how much damage you'd be taking per round. The monster, again, calculated as monsters or a range of monsters in the range of CR 2 to 4. And if you look at the monsters of that range, the majority of them have a +5 on their attack, and they have 1 to 2 attacks. A lot of them have 2 attacks, dealing an average of 12 damage each. Some of them only have 1 attack. Just to make these calculations a lot simpler, I'm just going to say every monster you face has 2 attacks, dealing 12 damage each. Some of them have 1 attack that's a much bigger attack that does like 20 damage. So we're just going to go for the one scenario so that we can simplify this. And it's still pretty complex. So Yeah, otherwise it's overwhelming. And also, the current calculations you see on the screen are using one monster. But yes, I have corrected the table and the formulas so that if I did just say multiply it by two monsters or just add another monster, all these calculations should update correctly. And I'm going to do that a bit later in this video so you can see the effect it has. Like when I say that the Mercy Monk, the value of the Mercy Monk tank, the value of deflect attacks drops quickly as you add more monsters with more attacks, because that deflect attack only blocks one attack. So, and I actually want to see that effect, and I've got some visualizations to show how that's going to play out to help everybody, all of us, wrap our heads around it. And the last one we're going to define is DRPR, which just stands for damage reduction per round. Again, I made up that term and I made up that abbreviation. What it stands for is the amount of damage you're going to block, and it only happens once per round, right? And you have to be able to do it every round to some degree. So good examples of this are the shield spell or the heroism spell, that every round at the start of your turn, you are granted some temporary hit points. Those don't happen on every attack. They only happen once per round. So once per round, you're going to block something like the shield spell. For that whole round, you're going to block a bunch of attacks because your AC is boosted, but it doesn't happen necessarily every round unless you keep casting it or have the number of spell slots to keep casting it. And the Steel Defender is also this example of this effect. The Steel Defender essentially has the protection fighting style, which means it can cause disadvantage on the first attack or whatever attack you want, one attack per round against an ally within 5 feet of the Steel Defender. So that's a once per round kind of block damage reduction, and those are 3 examples of what is in that column. And then that's how you get to your rounds to live, which is RTL. So you just add up hit points, add up self healing, do the calculation for the damage taken per monster based off of armor class, add in your damage reduction per round, divide it out, and that's how you get rounds to live, or you're going to survive that many rounds before you die if you're the only one being hit by this monster. Again, this is a single monster for these numbers, so maybe that's why some of them look fairly high. And I'll remind you that the pet classes actually tend to do a lot better because they have that pet that's soaking a bunch of damage too. The value of the pet drops as you go into higher tiers of play, both in the damage it contributes and the damage it soaks. But in tier 1, it's actually quite strong. So it's a kind of a big skewed number, a big factor in skewing the numbers at this tier. And we're just at level 4. Okay, let's get into the nitty gritty of calculating the DPR number that I referred to earlier. And I had a totally separate spreadsheet to help me calculate that. And then I just put that one number in the build table, whereas I do all the calculations for rounds to live right there in the build table. This one required its own table. Okay. And that, yeah, it might seem overwhelming. There's a lot of numbers on there. Really, it's because we have so many builds. Let's zero in on something we can focus on to make this a little bit easier. Okay. So just the very first row. All right, the first column is just build info to remind me which character this is. The second column is your basic combat loop. This isn't what you should necessarily always do in combat. There's going to be those niche scenarios where you're going to want to do something else, maybe cast Fairy Fire, a heal spell, something else. But unless you have a very specific other thing you want and need to accomplish, then this is your basic combat loop, meaning the Artificer Battlesmith level 4 is just going to attack every round with their longsword, okay? And this is where we start getting into the numbers. Okay, so your base, or the base damage you're doing, is a 1d8 plus 5, okay? 1d8 from your longsword, plus 4 from your 18 intelligence, and plus another 1 from your infusion on your longsword of enhanced weapon. So that gives you 1d8 plus 5. Then we break it out. The base weapon damage die is 1d8. The average for 1d8 is 4.5. We add, and then we split out the modifier, which is 5. That gives us, if you add those two together, average damage every time we attack is 9.5. You multiply that by the number of attacks we're making, and at level 4, it's just 1. And then that gives us 9.5 if we always hit. But we do not always hit. So then you have to factor in your chance to hit, which for most characters with an 18 intelligence at this monster level with the average armor class and an 18 in their primary attack modifier would be 60%. But the Battlesmith Artificer has that infusion, so they get another +1, which gives them a 65% chance to hit. So you multiply the max damage by that chance to hit of 65%. That gives us 6.2 damage. And then we add in the crit. And the crit is factored a little bit differently. The base damage of the crit, or the 1d8 plus 5, is already factored in that to that 65% chance to hit. So the only thing we should calculate to add on here is the additional damage you do from the crit, which would be another 1d8, not 1d8 plus 5, because you don't add the modifier twice. It's just the dice that you roll for the weapon damage. Okay, so it's another 1d8, which is average of 4.5, times a straight 5%. Okay, or divide by 20. That's the same thing. So 4.5 divided by 20 gives us 0.2. You add those together and you get 6.4 damage on average that the Battlesmith Artificer is going to do every round. Okay, but that's not the whole package for this character, because the whole package includes their Steel Defender, right? That's your pet. It's one of your primary subclass features. And so we have to calculate that damage as well. And so you do the same thing running along that line, calculating everything. It comes out to 4.1 damage for the Steel Defender if it attacks every round, which is going to take your bonus action every round. So your action is attacking the longsword. Your bonus action is to command the Steel Defender to attack every round. And that gives you another 4.1 damage on top of that for a total, you add those together, a total of 10.5 net DPR. And that is the total damage of this character. And then you just run through and do the same thing for every single character. Some of them have additional things you have to factor in, like the Goliaths of the fire lineage have to factor in their fire strikes. Anytime that the damage dice is different, or the modifiers are different, or the chance to hit is different, or the frequency you can use it is different, then you have to do a separate line item and calculate that all out. Like the fire strike, they can only do it twice per day at this level. And I'm factoring that there's 9 rounds of combat. So 3 combats, 3 rounds each, which is the average number of combats in a day, in my experience, and the average length of each combat, in my experience. It's usually 2 to 4 rounds. I just averaged it at 3. So if you can only do fire strike twice in a day, then that means you're going to do it 2 out of 9 rounds. And the way I handled that was in the attacks column, where I just did it's 2 divided by 9, which comes out to 0.22 attacks averaged out. Okay. So yeah, that's just how you do everything. And then you have to sum them up, and that's your net DPR. It's an interesting number to have. It's not very fun to calculate. I mean, I don't know. I enjoy calculating stuff, but not like 10 at a time. This was pretty overwhelming to do all these. Doing 1 at a time is fairly interesting. And this took a couple of weeks to get all this data together. So, plus the tanks data. So, yeah, that's how you do it. And finally, the payoff, visualization of data. And I think this is fun, right? I think most people can appreciate this. All right, so this is all of those DPR or offense numbers mapped with your defense RTL numbers, right? So your y-axis is offense, your x-axis is defense. So the higher up you are on the chart, the higher your damage. The further to the right you are on the chart, the higher your defense. Okay, so you can see way out there is the Mercy Monk. And in the upper right corner, just a reminder, this is one monster we're facing, right? And that skews the Mercy Monk way out there, okay? So let's see what happens if we make it just 2 monsters. Boop. Okay, you see how far those numbers, those dots now squish to the left? That is just the simple effect. It's identical monsters. We just have 2 of them instead of 1 now, and that squished everything way to the left. So the Mercy Monk is no longer, it's still further out to the right than any of the rest, but the effect you're having where it was just a huge gap on its own, that has been contracted quite a bit, okay? And if the damage of each monster were to scale a lot higher too, that would also reduce the effect of the monk's deflect attacks. Now, of course, having any number of monsters doesn't change how much damage you're doing, so the dots still have the same height on the chart. And just as a reminder, the blue dots are the tank builds I did, and the red dots are the frontliner builds. So there you have it. That's how you calculate all these numbers. That's how you put it all together. And then this is a way to visualize it to give you an idea of how this works. Keep in mind, this is, averages of averages. It's the basic combat loop. It doesn't account for everything you could possibly do. It doesn't account for every monster type. A lot of monsters at this CR have 12 or maybe even 13 AC. That's going to lower your damage. Some have less AC. Zombies have an AC of 8. That raises your damage. So this doesn't account for everything. This is the most common scenario, the most common case, and average damages that you're going to deal with your average chance to hit. Okay? But that's how you do it. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time.